I'm always a little worried a few minutes before a webinar when there's not a lot of people yet on that, oh no, did something go wrong?
Tends to be the last couple minutes always.
Yeah. Zooming literally from one meeting to the next often.
Yeah.
Hi Jill, hi Tim.
Hey, John.
Hey, Jen. Hey, it's like an NRPC reunion here.
Seriously.
Feel a
How
little
are you?
outnumbered.
Are you panelists are coming in and our attendees are attending?
So attendees are attendees, panelists. So Tim, Jill, and Mark all have co-host abilities just in case something were to go awry that other people can close the meeting, or if we needed to monitor for answering questions, or if someone busted into our Zoom somehow,
All
there
right.
are more eyes watching.
That assumes that we know what to do if that happens, but
We know what to do.
okay, good. It's all you guys.
I'm a professional at this point.
All right, I've got my pen and paper and I am taking old-fashioned notes, so I'll leave the technology up to you folks.
We are recording this and then it'll be posted on YouTube
All right.
probably tomorrow. And for attendees who have joined us, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. We're expecting about 20 people or so. For folks that are just joining us, we're going to get started in just a minute. We're going to give people a moment or two to get signed in or Zoom in from other meetings. All right, well, as other people join, they are welcome to listen in. And for everyone that's on right now, just so you know, we will be recording this webinar and it will be available for future viewing, probably first thing in the morning. We'll send a follow-up, but welcome to what is the Stratham Source Water Protection Plan draft sort of public outreach event. My name is Jen Rowden. I am a senior planner at Rockingham Planning Commission, and I've been working with folks at Stratham in conjunction for developing a source water protection plan, which has really been a good cooperative effort between RPC and the town of Stratham. Before we begin, I do want to just do a few little webinar logistics. I'm going to do my best to have everybody all done by 5 o'clock, but we'll certainly be sticking around for a few minutes if there are questions that go later. As we're going through, if you have a question, you can either use the hand raise function at the bottom of your screen, or you can also type in questions into the chat or question and answer option. We will do our best to get to all of the questions, but if we have run out of time or it's something we simply don't have access to answers in that moment, we will be providing a summary of the questions and topics that come up as part of this webinar at the end and as part of this source water protection plan. So with that, I'm just going to go through what we're going to cover during this outreach event, which is really providing a little bit of background about how this project came to be, the why and what of what source water protection actually is, a little overview about Stratham's drinking water, and then talking about what actually is in a source water protection plan that has been developed. Do an overview of the recommendations of actions for different folks within town and different municipal steps that can be taken, options for the town of Stratham, and also next steps. And then we'll get to the sort of question and answer portion of our webinar. As a quick background, back in 2019, RPC received a received a grant for doing what was phase 1 of developing a long-range Seacoast drinking water plan, which was part of a broader long-term drinking water plan commission report. But one of the tasks that we were lucky enough to get through that grant was to be able to provide some local technical assistance. So our first intention was to leap off of some work we had also done during that year on a different grant to assess the drinking water vulnerability of within all of the municipalities in our region, which comprised of 27 municipalities, and to see how vulnerable all of the public water systems are within our region, which we top out at about 700 public drinking water systems in RPC's region. Back in March of 2020, Tim Roach, who's also on the call and is the executive director of RPC, and I met with the Stratham town administrator and your town planner then to talk about whether the town would be interested in RPC using its technical assistance funds to develop a source water protection plan. Unfortunately, that was the week that COVID hit, so we got a little delayed in the process, but did move forward with developing the plan at the cooperation of the town. And then we started reviewing that plan with a review committee in the early part of 2021. So in February and early March, I met with several representatives from your Board of Selectmen, your Conservation Commission, and your Planning Board, along with Town Administrator, your Town Planner, Mark Connors, and your Building Inspector, Shanti Wolf, to review the plan and get their input and feedback and questions on ways that we could enhance the plan to meet the needs of Stratham, and also to get some ideas about what the priorities in Stratham or what some implementation tools may be most useful for Stratham. And then similarly, on March 17th, I also met with your Planning Board to review similar things, although it was in the context of reviewing the recommendations found in the plan that were very specifically geared towards the Planning Board. So stepping back a little bit, one of the big questions that whenever we talk about a source water protection plan is, well, why would you even bother to protect drinking water? There are lots of different ways, but they can basically be summed up in 4 main categories. One is you protect drinking water sources because it's a very simple public health benefit. If you can keep people's drinking water sources clean, then you reduce the risk of having to then do further treatment. It's less costly to protect the water at its source than to have to go and do treatment for folks that may get it on the other end of the tap, whether that be treatment on a private well or treatment in a larger system that connects to multiple homes or businesses. The second item is related to environmental and ecosystem benefits. Effectively, if you are able to protect water resources and drinking water resources, you're getting multiple benefits by protecting wildlife habitats, overall water resources, open space, but you're also protecting things that are ecosystem services like flood control and maintaining wetlands to be able to do pollutant removal. So you get a lot of bang for your buck when you protect drinking water sources. The next thing is the financial benefit. Effectively, it is financially prudent to protect drinking water. If you keep water clean, it's less likely, it costs a lot less than to treat contaminated water. And it's also good for either your local or regional economic status. And finally, it is just a quality of life. If you have good, clean drinking water, it's good for your ecosystem, it's good for your community, it's also good for your property values. So maintaining drinking water sources is all in all a good thing. You get a lot of benefit by going with that protection. Back in 2015, RPC actually did a statewide survey. I'm sorry, all of the RPCs, but Rockingham Planning Commission also did a statewide survey to find out what was important to people across the state. The number one thing that came back across the entire state is drinking water protection as one of the most important things that communities can protect and gear their protection efforts towards, is protecting drinking water, because people fundamentally understand protect drinking water and you protect a lot of other good things. So a little background about drinking water. When we're talking about drinking water, we're talking about what is happening on the land and how does that impact where we get our water, either if we get it from groundwater or from surface water systems. And then how do we get that into our final tap? In some cases, it goes through a water treatment plant. Stratham doesn't actually have a water treatment plant, but you do have different treatment levels depending on where you're getting your specific water. If you have your own home well, you're actually getting treatment. If you have any sort of arsenic removal or any sort of water softener or any filter, you're getting a form of treatment. Then you have a distribution system. This might just be the pipe from your private well into your house. It may also be the pipes that run in your neighborhood if you have a smaller community water system. And then finally, getting it to its final source, being people, is really the end of the line. When we're talking about drinking water source protection, there are actually several ways that are used to enhance that you're getting clean drinking water from your tap. But it goes all the way back to that source of that original water, and it's actually used by EPA and the state as called a multi-barrier approach to water protection. And the primary thing that we're focusing on is source water protection. So if you protect the source water, well, then the treatment you may need is significantly less the impact on your infrastructure may be less, and then the amount of monitoring that needs to occur may be less. But it also feeds back to each other. So some more local information. Stratham's drinking water is the reason we originally chose actually Stratham for the project that we were working on was because Stratham has a lot of characteristics of a lot of different issues that many of the towns in our region actually have, because you're similar to some towns, some aspects, and you have similar problems to a lot of towns. We did not pick Stratham, as it was asked in the planning board meeting that I had, because you have unusual problems. You actually just have pretty typical problems. That's why we picked you. But within Stratham, about a third of your residents actually get their water from what is qualified as a public water system. For the most part, that's smaller water systems that are in neighborhoods like a home with a homeowners association and typically serve a smaller number of people. About 70% of the rest of the town relies on private wells. That means either wells that are just serving one house or they are serving less than 25 people. So you may have a small cluster of a few homes that are served by one well, but they do not technically qualify under state and federal law as a public water system. There are 43 public water systems in Stratham. 19 of them are those community water systems. Those are water systems that serve more than 25 people for more than 6 months out of the year. And the populations those serve are between 25 people and 700 people. 100% of Stratham's drinking water comes from groundwater sources, which is pretty typical for this part of the state, although the farther north and west that you go, then you actually get more of a mixture of surface water sources. I'm going to pause there for a second because I see that Joe Anderson has a quick question. Joe, if you unmute, you can ask your question.
I do not, so I don't know.
Oh,
exactly
I'm sorry, your hand is raised. That was the reason I flagged you.
Oh,
Never mind. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, all of Stratham's drinking water is from groundwater sources. However, of your land, you're actually only covered by 16.2% of stratified drift aquifer. The map that you're seeing on the screen to the left is where all of these stratified drift aquifer sources are for Stratham. So you do have them. You don't have a lot of them compared to many towns, and you don't have very deep aquifers. The other statistic that is up here is how much impervious land cover you have. So that's roadways, roofs, hard-packed gravel, parking lots. And the reason that's important is that a general statistic that's put out there is that if you have more than 10% of impervious surface in an area, then you are going to start to have water quality decline. While that's a very broad statement and there's a lot of nuances to it, Stratham is actually getting up to that threshold that you may start to have water quality decline. There are ways of dealing with that. There are ways of mitigating some of the impacts of that. But one of the big recommendations that comes out of any source water protection plan is how are you going to manage your impervious surface, which across the state is responsible for approximately 90% of surface water pollution. And surface water and groundwater like to talk to each other. They tend to mix a lot. So it is an important statistic to keep in mind when we're talking about how much protection a town may need for its drinking water. The goal of developing this source water protection plan, and this is a really strong thing I want to emphasize, was to actually help protect Stratham's drinking water from current sources and potential future threats. This plan was not intended to address what may be some of the current issues in Stratham, but for actually prevent future contamination sources. For as an example, Stratham has been dealing with some PFOA contamination. It's an emerging contaminant across the state. That is certainly something that Stratham is in need of dealing with and rectifying. This project, however, is aimed at trying to prevent the next potential contamination source from actually becoming a problem. So this plan really addresses future threats, not existing problems. What this plan is definitely not, and this was done in cooperation with the town of Stratham, but this plan does not require Stratham to adopt or implement anything. It is simply meant to be as a guiding document to help ensure future drinking water sources. So usually when we work with a town, it's done with a little bit more implementation at the end to try and really get a town to adopt. And while we are strongly encouraging the utilization of this plan by Stratham, there is no obligation from any board or municipal official to be able to use this plan. So what's in this plan? You may have noticed that we did not post the plan on any website. It was not part of the link for the outreach. And that's because it really is still in draft form. We're in the process of incorporating a few bits of feedback from the planning board, but the feedback we get from today will also influence some components of this plan. So that's why it's still considered a draft plan. But the plan does provide an overview of what source water protection is and what the current water resources are in Stratham. It provides an overview of the status of drinking water protection in Stratham, specifically talking about the impervious surface coverage of some of the overall town and specific wellhead protection areas or areas that are influencing the different drinking water sources within town. A listing of either known or potential contamination sources. Those can be things like where you might have salt storage, where you might have someone that may be using hazardous chemicals above a certain quantity. It can be places like auto repair that may be using hazardous or toxic chemicals that if they're not properly contained or labeled, that they actually can become sources of pollution and contamination for drinking water. It also includes places where there are known confirmed contamination places in town that are under DES implementation for cleaning up. And it also includes a summary of some of the water restrictions that your town has adopted during conditions of drought. The real guts of the plan, however, are in the recommendations and implementation guidance for a whole host of different topics, such as impervious surfaces, how to deal with stormwater and septic requirements, some land management options, dealing with things like wildlife control and waste management, what to do during drought, and how to incorporate some emergency preparedness into some of this if there were to be, say, a spill of a container or some sort of accident that may pose a threat to drinking water. The following two sections that are in the plan are related to the public outreach, and that includes some recommendations about educational opportunities or resources the town can use to implement some of the recommendations. And then specifically, I highlight Appendix 4, which most of the appendices are really just background data for people to reference, but Appendix 4 is something that is really a good strength, I think, for this, for Stratham, in that we took your very recently adopted master plan and did a crosswalk with the recommendations in the source water protection plan to help the town be able to provide justification if they were to go and implement any of the recommendations, so that you have that justification, that adopted document that serves as the strategic plan for your town as backup for why you may be implementing that specific project or that specific option. So what I'm showing right here is one of the maps that's included within our source water protection plan. And what you're seeing are in this sort of a mottled red, that's your aquifer. Those are the aquifers that are protected under your current groundwater protection zoning ordinance within Stratham. The dots that you are seeing, and I'll zoom in on this in just a moment, are actually all of the public drinking water wells within Stratham. The circles that you see around them, or in some cases a little bit more of a blob type area, those are the areas designated by the state as wellhead protection areas. And what that translates to is the area of land that is actually being influences that well. So generally, if you have a well, which is in the center of most of these circles, the more water it is pumping is actually related to how big that wellhead protection area, that circle around the well actually is. But it also can be related to the type of well it is, whether that be a bedrock well or if it's a stratified drift well. Those are the areas designated by the state that are being influenced for those public drinking water systems. So a good chunk of Stratham is covered by those areas, but they don't provide a lot at the state level of protection for the wells. That's one of the things I'll get into, is that your town can always choose to adopt some additional regulations to protect those wellhead protection areas. But there are also large areas of Stratham that don't fall under your aquifer district or your wellhead protection areas, where people are relying on their own private wells that may have to have other considerations for protection of their source water. So this is just a little bit more zoomed in on the northern part of Stratham, just so folks can see a little more detail. Each of these wells are labeled with the name of the public water system. You'll note that the Stratham School, just as an example, is a public water supply, although it is not serving a community. It's not a residential well. It is actually just serving the same population of people going in it consistently, which is why it is designated as a public water system. Just a little additional piece of information is that you do have water lines within Stratham, though you do not have sewer lines. So what you're seeing on this map is the purple lines are actually public water system water lines. If you look over down to the southern area, you'll see areas of green in Exeter, which have both water and sewer service. And then there are portions that are brown lines, which are just getting sewer service, of which parts of the Stratham Industrial Park are serviced into the Exeter wastewater treatment system. So no part of Stratham has sewer other than that little corner. You do have some water infrastructure, but none of it is in large systems. It's mainly just from these smaller community water systems. The two nearest big municipal systems would be either the Portsmouth water system, the Aquarian water system coming through Northampton, or the Exeter water system. In the past, there have been efforts in Stratham to see if there may be feasibility for connecting to one or more of those for various reasons. But I will say that one thing people don't often think of when they're thinking of source water protection is that having multiple sources of water allows you to actually have more options. It is a form of protection in that if you were to have a contamination source at one of those sources, say one well becomes contaminated, it's easier to shut that well off and be able to not lose water supply by being able to redirect where you're getting your water from. So that is a very big option the town could always explore, but it is a very expensive option as well. So moving on, I've categorized these approximately into boards that would have to implement some of these actions that are being recommended. None of these can generally be done solely by that specified group, or there are components of it that could be definitely taken up by other groups in town, whether it be business owners, residents, conservation commissions, agricultural commissions, or the DPW director if he wanted to do an outreach campaign related to drinking water protection in his charge. So while these are labeled as planning board actions, and the next one will be select board actions, there are a whole host of other things that really could be taken underneath these. These are just really sort of the big high level ones. And the biggest thing that the planning board can actually consider is actually making amendments to the groundwater protection ordinance within Stratham. The big recommendation is that they can follow the DES model groundwater ordinance that has a lot of different considerations that may be applicable to Stratham or may not be quite what Stratham needs, but that can include things such as expanding what the boundaries are of your aquifer protection or groundwater protection district. It can be amending lists of what uses you may allow within that district, requiring things like spill prevention and control measures. That's sort of preventing if there were to be an accident, to make sure that businesses have on hand the things they need to keep that contaminant from getting into waterways. Including within your zoning, the best management inspection programs, which actually Stratham already conducts, but putting it into zoning gives it a little bit more teeth because it's codified. There's also things like amending the limits of impervious surface or ensuring proper stormwater management treatment is occurring on some of the different land uses as they turn over through in Stratham, either through when subdivisions are proposed for neighborhoods, or if you have new businesses coming into town, or as those businesses maybe turn over. The next item is to increase the minimum radius for a private well, currently under state standards, that's at 75 feet. The larger the radius or the circle that you have around a well, the better protection you're simply going to get for it. There are other competing factors as to how big you maybe want the lots in Stratham to be, or how small. There are a lot of other considerations, but that is a common one that many towns have taken up, is to increase their private well radius beyond the state standard of 75 feet. The next item is simply ensuring proper stormwater management and limiting impervious surfaces. Some of this Stratham is actually already working on, or is required to do under the federal stormwater, MS4 stormwater permit. So those are definitely in place, but because you are early on in your stormwater management program through the MS4 permit, just ensuring that keeps going on and those regulations are upheld are very important, both for the compliance with that permit, but also for protecting drinking water. The planning board can always increase some of the setbacks or requirements from as you're getting closer to drinking water sources or surface waters, as far as what is allowed to actually occur near those water bodies. Anything that is done to effectively improve water quality will improve drinking water from a land use perspective. Also, a requirement that can be done, especially when there are businesses coming in, is to require inspections and maintenance of septic systems and leach fields, just to ensure that they are not actually causing a contamination source with your drinking water sources, especially if they're in areas really concentrated with a lot of wells. And then finally, this is a very broad one, but it is one we're starting to see more and more, is to incorporate climate change into your drinking water protection efforts and any long-term planning. A good example of that is that we're getting increases in floods. We're also seeing sea level rise that may impact especially some of the water sources that are closer to Great Bay as we start to see more and more saltwater intrusion. It's possible some of those wells in the future may become less able to serve their populations. The next set of actions are more specific towards the select board, but you'll see some sort of crossover within the planning board. Again, the increasing the private well radius. This can actually be adopted as health ordinance or zoning. A lot of ordinances at the municipal level that are related to health can actually be related, can either be land use related, or they can go with the Board of Selectmen. It sort of depends on a town's preference as to how they would like to adopt something like that or enforce it. The next one is actually continuing to fund the best management inspection program that your town actually already employs. Effectively, what that means is some businesses that may either have hazardous waste or deal with chemicals that, if they were to not be dealt with properly or managed properly, could pose a contamination threat, routinely get inspected by your building inspector, and who is able then to help recommend ways that they can better protect some of your drinking water by making sure things are stored properly, they're stored inside, they're stored in containers that if there were to be a leak can also contain them again, that they are properly labeled. It's really just an easy best practices that most businesses do anyway. So it's a voluntary inspection program that really can prevent a lot of problems for both the business owner and for the town and surrounding property owners at a very low cost. So maintaining that program is really, really important. So I'm really impressed that Stratham has been doing it for as long as it has. It's one of the few towns that has been doing it routinely for years and years in our immediate region. The next one is really related to more of a water quantity than quality, and that is to adopt a water conservation plan at the municipal level. That can actually also serve to help guide the municipal actions during drought. Stratham has adopted the ability under state law to enact water restrictions from both private wells and public water systems. That's generally related to outdoor watering and car washing during drought conditions. But furthering that plan and really giving a refined detail about what would happen when at certain points and communicating that is something really important that the select board or the conservation commission or a number of other groups could really do and implement and work together on. Number 4 is working with that emergency response if there were to be a spill, to make sure that everybody that would be involved knows what to do and what the protocols are if there were to be an emergency situation. Number 5 is related to ensuring that there are best management practices when it comes to road maintenance. So that's things like how much salt are you putting on the roads, where and when, to be able to try and minimize that because of not wanting to have contamination due to sodium. That also gets related back to stormwater runoff and the MS4 permit, of which Stratham is just coming under, and some of those requirements are just coming into place. So it's not only a good prevention for drinking water protection, you're also required to do it through EPA. Number 6 gets a little farther into the MS4 permit, and that you have to have public education as part of that federal stormwater permit related to water protection. Well, if the town can get sort of 2 birds with 1 stone by having that really geared towards drinking water protection in addition to meeting your stormwater permit requirements. Number 7, and this is something that is not commonly done, although certainly towns have the ability to do it, is to require private well testing when there is a real estate transfer. And this could be adopted as a health ordinance. Under state standards, there is no requirement to test a private well at any point. If you get a new well drilled for a private well, it is reported to the state who drilled it, where it's latitude and longitude, and then how deep it is. The water quality is never required to be tested. At the local level, during a real estate transfer, that can be required. It is admittedly difficult to enforce, but it is something that at least can spur some good health testing, because the majority of private well owners do not test their wells, and most of the recommendations is a standard well test be done at least annually for bacteria, and then every 3 to 5 years for most other standard contaminants. Number 8 is one that we've put in there just because it seems like a good opportunity for Stratham to continue conversations about whether there may be desire or need to extend public water and sewer into Stratham from any of the adjacent municipalities if possible. There were about 10 years ago some steps towards seeing if Stratham could connect with Exeter that didn't at that time pan out, but as Stratham grows, there may be a need to do such. So really just continuing to explore if that is an option for Stratham. And then the last,
Right, you know, there is one question in the chat.
Thank you, Tim.
I don't know if you want to address that now before you go too far.
Sure, concern number 3. Drought management, what are the restrictions on golf courses and aquarium withdrawals during the drought? So aquarium water system does have a few wells within Stratham, although they're mainly on the Northampton Stratham line, and then also with restrictions for the golf course. So Stratham in its water conservation restrictions that it can impose can be towards any private well owner or public well owner as far as restricting outdoor water use very specifically. Aquarium is required to have a water conservation plan because of the amount of water it withdraws. However, Stratham's ability to control that is somewhat limited because it is an interconnected system with their bigger well fields in Northampton and Hampton. But certainly as far as outdoor water restrictions, you can certainly limit the amount of outdoor watering or completely prohibit it for watering at golf courses or limit the times it can be. All right, backing up to item 9, and this is a really kind of easy thing because Stratham is already doing it. You'll note how many of these items really just say continue, because Stratham's been doing most of the really important things already as far as participating in a regional household hazardous waste, which is actually coordinated through Rockingham Planning Commission on the 3rd Saturday in October. And Tim, correct me if I got the Saturday wrong, where households can bring household hazardous waste with typically it's about a $10 to $20 donation where it is disposed of properly. And in last year we had, I want to say almost 20,000 pounds of hazardous waste that got properly disposed of, somewhere in that ballpark. And a good chunk of that actually did come from Stratham. So moving on, the following are sort of a summary of a lot of other actions that are within the Source Water Protection Plan itself. But they're really municipal actions that could be taken on, not just by the municipality, but by residents as well. And the number one is to promote land conservation or land preservation near drinking water supply sources. That is simply not allowing land that is not developed, keeping it undeveloped is one of the best ways to protect drinking water. It's one of the most cost-effective ways. If you're not going to allow a lot of the uses that can potentially contaminate it, be it a septic system, a house, a road, a business, if it stays away from the wells, it's hard for it to contaminate the wells. Number 2 is effectively public outreach. The more residents can be informed of how their actions impact drinking water, either related to stormwater, how you deal with lawn care, how you deal with pet waste, how you deal with septic system maintenance, not changing your oil over your lawn, and how you dispose of household hazardous waste, all of those things compound to protecting drinking water. And you can do it on a budget of no money to lots of money. It's very scalable. And you can prioritize what is most important to Stratham and what fits with what the priorities are within that. Number 3 is really about educating landowners. And that's not just, your private resident, that's also business owners, people who are dealing with agriculture or having some forestry done on their property, of practices that they can do that are usually very simple things, and they're probably already doing a lot of them to protect water quality. It can be things like manure management, all the way down to not cutting your lawn, all the way down to the wetland. It can also be things like how you may be doing crossings if you're having some logging done on your property. Number 4 is really collecting information. Having proper maps of where you're doing collection or where you may have problems, knowing what information you need for water quality monitoring, knowing where you're doing that monitoring, to better understand what impacts are occurring on the land that may actually be causing problems. So do you need to monitor an area because you're having people coming up with wells that have a lot of E. coli? Well, maybe there's other more investigative work. So data is important. It can tell us a lot. And number 5 kind of comes back to what I had brought up before about incorporating climate change science, the best climate change science, into decisions that may impact drinking water sources going forward, because the decisions we make now related to that will impact people in 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years from now. So generally, now I'm getting to the Stratham has this plan, or we'll have the final plan very soon. What do you do with it? Well, there are a couple of options. The first, and this is really related to the planning board, is to adopt the Source Water Protection Plan as part of the master plan. It can either be an appendix. It can be a supplemental document. It could become a chapter if the planning board wanted to do it that way. Number 2 is you can always refer to this plan in zoning regulations that may get adopted, and that could be subdivision or site plan regulations, or actually health regulations could refer back to it. The third option is to use it as a reference, but not officially incorporate it into any documents, but then just use it as a guide for maybe some actions the town might take if applying for a grant or trying to drum up support for doing a specific action. And the fourth option is simply do nothing with it and say, thanks for doing this, RPC. We appreciate it, and we maybe never hear from you again. I hope that is not the case, because the Source Water Protection Plan really is a good tool. If nothing else, it can be really used to help foster support for the town being able to go out for funding to do some of this work. There are certainly grants available through the state that help to address a lot of drinking water source protection, but there are also a lot of other grants that are available for doing land conservation or water quality protection or natural resource protection, of which always prioritize, does this also help to protect drinking water sources? It's almost always one of the #1 things that people are looking to protect, because they're trying to get the most bang for their buck out of grant dollars that are being given out at the state or federal level. So the next steps with the plan are that we are going to continue to do some minor revisions based on review from the review committee and the planning board meetings that were held in the past few weeks. We are going to capture questions or topics that come up in our sort of question and answer session in just a few minutes. And then we are, within the next few days, going to send to Stratham officials, and it'll get distributed to the select board and the planning board, and we'll ensure that the Conservation Commission and other boards also have a copy, with a memo that sort of outlines the different options they have for incorporating it into Stratham's work, or not, if the case may be. So that'll be coming very soon. But once the plan is finalized, we will be posting it on RPC's website. We will also have the YouTube video of this presentation available, so that if people want to come back and reference it, it can be used as a resource. And with that, I am done talking, unless folks have questions, of which I would strongly encourage. So if you would like to raise your hand with the raise hand feature on the chat at the bottom, or would like to type in questions into the chat, we're here and happy to answer questions. Let's see. I'll go with Scott. You should be able to unmute.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, question I had was in terms of protecting source water, is there any thought about overdraft? In other words, protecting it in the sense of not taking too much out of the aquifers?
That certainly can be part of a water conservation plan. Given the diversity of the water supplies that Stratham has, it would be difficult to do on a municipal level. I will say that for every new public water supply well that is put in place, they are required under state law to develop a water conservation plan, which sort of gets to that issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joe
Anderson? You have your hand raised again, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, now I do actually have a question.
Okay,
so
great.
Thank you. I just want to say, very comprehensive, great job. And since I think you said over 60% of our town waters on private wells.
About 70.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I think we really need to take a hard look at what we can do to further protect our groundwater. So, and I think that could be done in a number of steps. Build awareness in the community, and some of these you've talked about. So build awareness in the community, you certainly talked about, and you did a really good job in terms of next steps, like planning board steps, select board steps, and then I think there was a summary at the end. So, I think it would be sad if we just used it as a reference and did nothing with it. I guess this is my question now, though. So of all of those steps, and I know there's a number of things that you have continue to do things, so not those, but what are the kind of the easy layups that you would suggest? And I don't know if this would be an easy layup, but extending the protection zone from 75 feet to 100 feet. So something like that. So what are the easy actionable next steps? And I guess I was trying to segregate the planning board and select board's list into, okay, they can just go ahead and do these things. And then the rest of the list would, need some further thought and discussion.
Yep. So the easiest step, or I would say the step that I would recommend, I don't want to say it's automatically easy, but the step that I would recommend the most is actually that the planning board look to see if there are modifications that can be done to your existing groundwater protection ordinance to increase protection by preventing contaminations from potential uses that you might not want within either your wellhead protection areas, so those circles around all the public water supplies, or that you may not want to allow just outright over your stratified drift aquifers. So really using that DES model ordinance as a starting would be the number one thing for the planning board I would recommend. But related to expanding the private well radius from say 75 feet to 100, there are a lot of considerations that do need to come into that, because it does impact how big your lots may be required to be, because you'd have to have at least a 200-foot wide lot in some areas, and that doesn't necessarily always fit when you're having something like a cluster subdivision or a compact neighborhood being built. So there are other competing interests that
Can
may
you
be
still
there.
hear me?
I can.
Okay. So, yeah, but lot size, that would only be protection in terms of like, and you're the expert in this, not me, but the distance from the well to like where the septic and leach field is.
Correct.
So not necessarily lot size, though, right?
Right. Wells, all private wells have to be fully located on the parcel that they serve. So if you had an individual house with an individual lot, it has to be, if you wanted that 100-foot radius, it would have to be fully within that house's lot. That's why it impacts minimum lot size.
Okay.
All right.
Question in the Q&A, Jen, from Paul Perano.
Thank you, Paul. It looks like, can homeowners with wells use well water to fill swimming pools? This could reduce the water source from the aquifer. In short, yes, homeowners can use well water to fill a swimming pool. They can use municipal water or public water systems if they're in a homeowners association with a small well. You can. I will say, as a private well owner, that in the past, it can really not be great for your well pump. But yes, there are, however, when there are restrictions on outdoor water use, one of the first things, in addition to watering lawns, can be that they can't be used to fill swimming pools at a certain level. Are there any other questions? If not, I will say I really enjoy talking about this topic. I really like doing source water protection, and I like dealing with water resources. So if you have heard this presentation, and then we will do a follow-up email to everybody that has attended when the video is available online and when the plan is available. But if in the meantime you come up with a burning question that you would like an answer to, please feel free to email me. My email address is up on the screen right now, or to give me a call. I'd be more than happy to answer, and we'll try to get you as much information as we possibly can. But with that, unless there's any last minute questions, I'll stay on for a few minutes, but I do want to thank Mark Connors, your town planner, for his participation and really good insight into helping us update this or create this plan. I want to thank Jill Longval, who also helped in developing the plan. And then I'm going to say thank you to my boss for just being here and helping manage some of the chat questions. So thank you to everyone who participated. And for those of you that were on the review committee that are still on the panel or still on the line, I want to thank you for your participation as well.
Great. Thank you, Jen, very much. That was great.
All right.
Right.
All right. And with that, everyone, I'm going to end the webinar and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks you.
Thank you.